Somewhere in the rainforests of Thailand, an ant is climbing a plant. It has never done this before in its life. It will never do it again. Something else is making the decisions now. You are watching one of the strangest hijackings in nature. The ant's legs are moving, but the ant is not driving. A fungus is behind the wheel. And by the time this is over, the ant's body will not belong to the ant at all. This looks like body horror, but the real answer is far stranger and far more precise than horror movies ever imagine. The fungus responsible is called Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. You do not need to remember the name. Just remember what it does. It infects carpenter ants in tropical forests, and it does not simply kill them. It reprograms them. Slowly, deliberately, with a level of control that took scientists decades to fully map. Here is how it begins. A single fungal spore lands on an ant's exoskeleton while the ant is out foraging on the forest floor. That spore doesn't wait for an opening. It manufactures one. Using a combination of mechanical pressure and enzymes, it drills directly through the ant's hard outer shell and enters its body. Once inside, the fungus doesn't rush. For days, it grows quietly through the ant's insides, spreading as thread-like cells throughout the body cavity. The ant keeps foraging. It keeps working. Nothing about its behavior looks unusual yet. This is the fungus buying time, building its network cell by cell. Then something changes. Researchers at Penn State University, led by entomologist David Hughes, spend years studying exactly what happens next. Using time-lapse cameras and behavioral tracking in Thai rainforests, Hughes and his colleagues documented something that had only been described anecdotally before. The ant leaves its colony, climbs vegetation, and locks its jaws onto a leaf vein in a very specific position, at a very specific height, at a very specific time of day. This is not random wandering. It is a targeted, repeatable behavior, and it happens with startling precision. Why does the height matter? Because the fungus needs a very particular combination of temperature and humidity to grow its final structure and release spores successfully. Too low, and conditions aren't right. Too high, and the spores won't disperse properly onto the forest floor below, where other ants are foraging. Hughes's team found that infected ants consistently die clamped to leaves at a height of roughly 25 centimeters above the ground, in a microclimate that is almost eerily consistent from ant to ant, forest to forest. How does a fungus know where 25 centimeters is? It doesn't, not the way you or I understand knowing. What the fungus does is something more unsettling. It doesn't need a brain to make decisions if it can control the one already available to it. For a long time, scientists assumed the fungus was invading the ant's brain directly, essentially taking over its control center like flipping a switch. But newer research complicated that picture. A study led by biologist Carissa de Becker, then at Pennsylvania State University and later at the University of Central Florida, used genetic sequencing to examine what was actually happening inside infected ants at the cellular level. Her team discovered that fungal cells surround the muscle fibers controlling the ant's mandibles and limbs, rather than clustering primarily inside the brain tissue itself. In other words, the fungus may not be hacking the ant's mind so much as hijacking its muscles directly, releasing chemical compounds that force specific movements, regardless of what the ant's own nervous system is signaling. The brain might still be sending confused, contradictory messages. It doesn't matter. The muscles are no longer listening to the brain. They are listening to something else. Think about what that means. Somewhere in that ant's nervous system, its own brain may still be intact, still processing the world, still technically alive and functioning right up until the very end. But it has lost the ability to command its own body. You are watching a passenger trapped in a vehicle it can no longer steer. Once the ant clamps down on that leaf vein in that final death grip, the fungus finishes the job. It kills the ant completely, then begins to grow a stalk directly out of the back of its head. This structure, called a stroma, will eventually rupture and release a rain of spores down onto the forest floor below, where new, unsuspecting ants are foraging for food, ready to begin the entire cycle again. Here's the detail that should stop you. This isn't a chaotic, opportunistic infection scattering itself randomly. It is targeted. The fungus has, through millions of years of evolutionary refinement, arrived at a strategy so specific that it essentially aims. It picks its host's final resting place with the accuracy of someone using a measuring tape. And it gets stranger still. Colonies of carpenter ants are not defenseless against this threat. Researchers observing wild colonies have documented healthy ants detecting infected nestmates before the fungus reaches its final, spore-releasing stage, and physically carrying them out of the nest, dumping them far from the colony. This is sometimes described as a form of social immunity, a collective defense mechanism where the health of the group is protected by sacrificing individual members before they become a spore-launching threat to everyone else. That means this isn't just a story about one fungus and one ant. It's a story about an evolutionary arms race that has been running for millions of years. Fossil evidence backs this up in a remarkable way. In 2010, researchers analyzing fossilized leaves from Messel Pit in Germany, a site roughly 48 million years old, found the exact same telltale bite marks on leaf veins that infected ants leave today. The behavior is not new. It has been happening since long before humans existed to notice it. So why should any of this matter to you, someone who will probably never encounter a zombie ant fungus in your lifetime? Because this relationship reveals something uncomfortable and fascinating about how much control one organism can exert over another without ever touching its conscious will. You like to think of behavior as a product of intention, decisions, choices. But an ant climbing to exactly 25 centimeters and locking its jaws at a precise time of day shows you that behavior can be rewritten from the outside, cell by cell, without permission, and without resistance the animal is even capable of mounting.
It also reveals something about the sheer precision evolution is capable of producing. Ophiocordyceps didn't need intelligence to develop a strategy this exact. It needed only time, death, and countless failed attempts, refined generation after generation, until only the most precisely targeted version of the fungus survived to reproduce. Every fungus killing an ant in the wrong spot, at the wrong time, in the wrong climate, simply failed to spread. Only the most accurate killers passed their strategy forward. There's a broader pattern here too. Parasites that manipulate host behavior aren't rare oddities. They show up across the animal kingdom in different forms. Certain hairworms drive crickets to leap into water and drown themselves so the worm can complete its aquatic life cycle. Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite carried by cats, appears to reduce fear responses in infected rodents, making them less cautious around predators. In each case, the underlying strategy is the same. Hijack behavior to serve the parasite's reproductive needs, not the host's survival. What makes the zombie ant fungus special isn't that manipulation like this exists. It's how measurable, how repeatable, and how architecturally precise this particular version of it is. Hughes's field studies didn't just observe a pattern once. They documented it across multiple ant species and multiple fungal strains across different continents, each one adapted to the specific humidity and canopy height of its particular forest. The fungus in Thailand aims for a slightly different height than the fungus in Brazil, calibrated to local conditions. This isn't one blunt strategy. It's a family of extraordinarily fine-tuned strategies, each shaped by its own environment. So the next time you watch an ant crawling across a leaf, doing what looks like completely ordinary ant business, remember what you now know. Somewhere in that same forest, another ant might be climbing toward a very specific height, for reasons that have nothing to do with its own survival, driven by something that took over its body one cell at a time. That ant on the plant in Thailand was never in control of its final movements. But it wasn't broken either. It was executing,
with mechanical precision, a program written by another organism entirely. And that is a truth stranger than any horror movie could invent.